40 years I have spent in the service of the tithe, and in all that time, I have never once seen the sky. My world is not a planet of air and light, but a stack of iron cages reaching into the crushing dark, where the very concept of a window is a luxury reserved for those who command the death of stars. To understand the average home in the Imperium is to understand the geometry of a coffin. We do not live in houses, we inhabit habitation units. Slab, grey cells of permacrete and rusted steel, stacked 300 high in a single corridor that smells eternally of ozone, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of recycled oxygen. Here, home is not a sanctuary, but a temporary station between the factory floor and the reclamation vats. A place where the hum of the ventilation is the only lullaby we are ever permitted to hear. If you still walk beside me through fire and scripture, then bear witness. Subscribe, share this burden, and let others hear the truth buried beneath hymns. The cycle of our existence is governed by the vibration of the deck plating beneath our feet, a constant, low, frequency thrum that settles into the marrow of your bones until you no longer hear it, only feel its absence in those rare, terrifying moments when the Hive's secondary power grids fail. My father died in the same 3-meter square hab cell where I was born, and his father before him, back through a lineage of laborers whose names have been scrubbed from the cogitators of the administratum by the simple passage of centuries. To walk the corridors of the Gamma, level residential blocks, is to traverse a graveyard of the living, where the air is a heavy, recycled soup of carbon dioxide and the incense burned by the tech priests to appease the temperamental ventilation spirits. You learn early that space is the most precious commodity in the galaxy, far more valuable than a human life, which is a resource the God Emperor possesses in infinite abundance. Each morning, the wake-up klaxon screams through the Vox grills, a jagged, metallic sound that tears through the thin veil of sleep, signaling that our 6 hours of allotted rest have concluded. We rise from tiered bunks of cold, extruded resin, our joints stiff from the damp that clings to the walls like a living thing. There is no privacy here. The walls of the hab unit are thin enough to hear the labored breathing of the family in the next cell, the rhythmic coughing of a child dying of lung rot, and the low, muttered prayers of the elderly who know they will not survive the next work shift. The floor is covered in a layer of grime that no amount of scrubbing can ever truly remove, a composite of boot rubber, industrial soot, and the shed skin of millions of citizens who have inhabited this block since the founding of the Hive. The plumbing is a temperamental network of lead pipes and copper valves that groan and shriek whenever the water pressure fluctuates, which is nearly always. The water we use to wash our faces and drink is a tepid, grey fluid, reclaimed from the waste sinks of the levels above us, chemically treated until it tastes of chlorine and old iron. We do not complain, for to complain is to invite the attention of the enforcers, and their attention is a weight no man can carry for long. Instead, we focus on the small rituals of survival. I spend 5 minutes every morning polishing the small brass skull fixed above my doorway, ensuring that the Emperor's gaze finds no blemish in my devotion. It is the only bright spot in a room of shadows, a tiny fragment of gold in a world of slate and rust. The rest of the cell is occupied by the necessities of the labor class. A folding table for the evening ration of corpse starch, a single storage locker for our work, coveralls and heavy boots, and the cog, blessed chronometer that dictates our movements with the cold precision of a guillotine. To live in the Hive is to be part of a colossal machine that never sleeps, and our homes are merely the grease between the gears. The noise is a physical weight, the distant roar of the smelting vats, the hiss of steam pipes, the clatter of the maglev trains carrying thousands of souls to the manufacturum zones. We are never truly silent. Even in the dead of the night cycle, the building itself seems to speak, its metal bones expanding and contracting with the heat of the lower depths. My neighbor, a man named Harlan who lost an arm to a malfunctioning press, cog, used to say that the hive was breathing, and that one day it would simply stop, exhaling all of us into the void. He disappeared 3 months ago during a routine sweep by the Imperial officers, and his Hab cell was stripped and reassigned within the hour. That is the reality of our domestic life. You are a tenant only so long as you are a functional component of the machine. The moment you break, the cell is emptied, the previous occupant's life scrubbed away with caustic soap to make room for the next warm body. We do not own the things in our homes, we merely hold them in trust for the state. The furniture is bolted to the floor. The light strips are hard, wired into the grid, and even the air we breathe is metered and monitored for signs of sedition or chemical imbalance. On the rare occasions when the ration haulers are delayed by a strike in the transit, ways or a warp shadow over the sector, the hunger in the residential blocks becomes a palpable thing, a sharpened edge that turns neighbors into strangers. We sit in our cells and listen to the stomach growls of the hive, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling as the emergency lumens flicker. In those moments, the home feels less like a shelter and more like a trap, a cage of our own making where we wait for the master to remember to feed us. Yet, even in the depths of this deprivation, there is a strange, desperate pride. We decorate our walls with the parchment, scraps of prayer strips, the wax of our votive candles dripping down the permacrete in long, frozen tiers of white and red. We make our homes into tiny cathedrals. For if the Emperor is watching, we must show him that even in the dirt, we are his loyal servants. The sensory reality of the Hab block is one of constant, grinding friction. The smell is the first thing that hits a stranger, though we have long since become nose blind to it. It is the smell of 1,000,000 bodies packed into a space meant for 1,000, a mixture of unwashed cloth, rancid cooking oils, and the chemical tang of the clean air, scrubbers that never quite manage to purge the scent of the chemical vats. When the humidity rises, the walls weep a black, oily condensation that stains everything it touches. We use rags to soak it up, but the dampness is eternal, settling into our lungs and manifesting as the hive cough, a dry, hacking sound that serves as the background music to our lives. Children are raised in this environment. Their playground, the narrow maintenance shafts, and the trash chutes where they scavenge for scraps of copper or discarded tech parts. They learn the geography of the pipes before they learn the names of the stars. Their world defined by the limits of the flickering lumen, bulbs and the iron gates that separate our block from the more affluent levels above. In the evening, when the shift bell tolls and the mass of humanity pours back into the residential sectors, the corridors become a river of grey-clad souls. We move in a trance of exhaustion, our eyes downcast, our minds focused only on the meager comfort of a hard bunk and a warm meal. The meal is almost always the same, a slab of reconstituted protein, grey and rubbery, served with a cup of recycled water flavored with synthetic caffeine substitute. We eat in silence, for we are too tired for talk, and the walls have ears that belong to the inquisitorial informers who dwell among us. Every word spoken in the home is a risk, every sigh of frustration a potential sign of heresy. We have learned to communicate in shrugs, in the pressure of a hand on a shoulder, in the way we look at the icons of the saints on our walls. Our homes are fortresses of silence in a world of mechanical noise. The only places where we can allow the mask of the dutiful worker to slip, if only for a few hours. The lighting in the Hab units is a constant source of irritation. The lumens are old, their filaments vibrating with an audible hum that sets your teeth on edge. They cast a harsh, yellowish light that washes the color out of everything, making the skin look waxen and the food look like clay. When they burn out, it can take weeks for a replacement to be issued from the central stores, leaving families to huddle around a single, guttering candle or the glow of a portable heater. In the darkness, the hive feels even larger, the scale of our insignificance magnified by the shadows that loom in the corners of the room. We tell stories then, whispered accounts of the worlds beyond the clouds, where the ground is made of dirt and the water falls from the sky. These are dangerous stories, but bordering on the fantastical, but they are the only things that keep the crushing weight of the permacrete from breaking our spirits entirely. We dream of a sun we have never seen, while the heat of the hive's core warms our feet through the floorboards. I remember my mother's hands, cracked and stained with the grease of the machine shop, as she meticulously mended our tattered blankets by the light of a stolen globe. She treated those blankets as if they were the finest silks of the spire, nobles, for she knew that if they failed, the chill of the hive night would seep into our bones. Everything in our home had a history of repair. The table legs were braced with scrap iron. The bunk frames were welded and re-welded, and the icons of the saints were held together with prayers and spit. We possessed nothing that was whole, nothing that was new. Our existence was a college of salvaged parts, a testament to the Imperium's ability to grind every last drop of utility out of both metal and flesh. This is the average home, a place where the concept of new does not exist, only functional or scrap. The transition from the work zone to the home zone is marked by the passage through the purification arches, where a fine mist of sanctified chemicals is sprayed over us to kill any fungal spores or toxins we might have carried back from the depths. It stings the eyes and leaves a bitter taste on the tongue, but it is a necessary ritual. To bring the rot of the sump into the residential blocks is a crime punishable by immediate eviction. We step through the arches, dripping and shivering, and make our way up the rusted stairwells to our respective cages. The elevators broke down during the reign of the previous planetary governor and were never repaired, so those who live on the higher tiers must endure a climb of 40 flights of stairs at the end of a 14-hour shift. It is a slow, grueling ascent, the air growing thinner and hotter with every step, the walls lined with the sleeping forms of those who were too exhausted to make it all the way to their doors. Inside the unit, the space is so confined that every movement must be choreographed. If I am at the table, my wife must remain on the bunk. If she is washing her face at the basin, I must stand by the door. We move around each other with a practiced grace born of necessity, a silent dance of proximity that defines our intimacy. There is no room for anger here, for there is nowhere to go to escape it. There is no room for secrets, for every whisper is shared. We are forged together by the pressure of the hive, our lives compressed into a diamond, hard core of shared survival. When the Hab, Block's chaplain, comes through for the weekly blessing, we stand in a line, our heads bowed, as he sprinkles holy water that smells of ozone over our meager belongings. He tells us that our poverty is a virtue, that our suffering is a gift to the Emperor, and that our cramped cells are the foundations upon which the Palace of Terror is built. We believe him because we have to. To believe anything else is to admit that we are living in a tomb. The windows, if you can call them that, are narrow slits of reinforced glass steel, clouded by centuries of grime and scarred by the acidic rain that occasionally leaks down from the upper spires. You cannot see the world through them. You can only see the flickering lights of the neighboring Hab, Block, a mirrored reflection of our own misery across a chasm filled with smog and transit vessels. It is a view of 1,000 other cages, each filled with souls just like us, all staring out into the same grey void. Sometimes, during the festival of the Emperor's Ascension, the upper spires release massive bursts of chemical flares that tint the smog in shades of violet and gold. For a few minutes, we crowd around the slits, watching the colors bleed into the haze, a fleeting reminder that there is beauty somewhere in the universe, even if it is a beauty born of burning phosphorus. Then the flares die out, the smog swallows the light, and we return to our bunks, the darkness feeling heavier than before. Security in the Hab, Block is a constant, looming presence. The doors are heavy iron, locked from the outside during the night, cycle by a central command hub. We are kept safe from the dangers and the mutants of the underhive, but we are also kept in. To be home is to be accounted for. A data point on a parchment scroll that tells the masters exactly where every laborer is located. If a rebellion breaks out 3 sectors away, our block is sealed. The oxygen scrubbers dialed back to minimum to keep us docile while the enforcers go floor to floor with shock moles and heavy stubbers. I have seen the results of those wellness checks. The doors kicked off their hinges. The interiors of the cells painted with the red reminder of what happens to those who harbor seditious thoughts. The home is not a sanctuary from the state. It is a branch of the state, a place where the law is enforced by the very architecture of the room. Despite the hardship, there are moments of profound, quiet humanity. On the feast days of the local martyrs, the families in our corridor will pool their meager rations to create a communal stew. We drag our folding tables into the hallway, setting them end to end under the flickering lumens, and share stories of our ancestors. We trade scraps of news from the front lines, rumors of crusades and victories in distant star systems that we will never visit. For an hour, the corridor isn't a transit way. It's a village square. We sing hymns in low voices, the sound echoing off the metal walls, a defiant chorus against the silence of the void. These moments are the glue that holds the hive together. Without the shared warmth of the Hab block, the crushing weight of the Imperium would have ground us into dust long ago. We are a family not by blood, but by the shared experience of the cage. When the end comes, it is usually quiet. You do not die in a hospital in the hive, you die in your bunk, surrounded by the same 4 walls that have watched you grow old. The corpse guild arrives within the hour, their heavy black carts rattling over the floorboards. They offer a brief prayer, collect the body, and issue a receipt that allows the family to keep the cell for another 48 hours while a new laborer is found to fill the quota. There is no time for mourning, only for the practicalities of the transition. We strip the bunk, wash the floor, and wait for the new occupant to arrive with their single bag of belongings and their own small brass skull to fix above the door. The cycle continues, the machine demands its tribute, and the average home remains as it has always been, a cold, hard, iron-bound necessity in a galaxy that has forgotten the meaning of peace. This is our life. This is the Imperium, and there is no other way. The nutrition we consume within these walls is as recycled as the air, a process testament to the Imperium's refusal to let any matter go to waste. In the center of my Hab cell sits the dispenser, a tarnished silver, grey nozzle that groans when the daily ration cycle begins, extruding a slab of translucent, gelatinous matter we call corpse starch. It has no flavor, or rather, it has the flavor of everything and nothing. A faint metallic tang, a hint of ancient dust, and the chemical sharp of preservatives that keep the rot at bay. We eat it because the alternative is the reclamation vats, and in the hive, there is no greater sin than the wasting of the Emperor's fuel. My wife, Elara, used to try and season it with the scrapings of lichen she found in the lower moisture farms. But even that small rebellion against the blandness of our existence was eventually snuffed out by the scarcity of the seasons. To sit at the folding table and stare at that grey block is to confront the reality of our biological function. We are engines of flesh, and this is the coal that keeps us burning long enough to complete the next 14-hour shift. Beyond the walls of the cell, the architecture of the residential spire is a labyrinth of unintended consequences. The original blueprints, drawn 10,000 years ago by some forgotten architect of the Adeptus Mechanicus, have been buried under layers of unauthorized additions, emergency retrofitting, and the slow, grinding creep of the hive's own decay. Corridors that were meant to be grand thoroughfares are now narrowed by the encroachment of makeshift shrines and illegal trade, stalls where one can barter a week's ration for a handful of real tobacco or a rusted filter plug. The ceiling is a tangled forest of conduits, some carrying high voltage power to the manufactorums, others dripping a foal. Neon, green coolant that eats through the shoulders of your coveralls if you stand beneath a leak for too long. We navigate this geography by instinct, knowing which shadows hide the enforcer patrols and which vents exhale the sweetest air. Though sweet is a relative term in a place where the atmosphere is thick enough to chew. The hierarchy of the home is determined by the depth of your descent. On our level, the Gamma 9 mid, we are considered fortunate because we still have floorboards that do not vibrate with the heat of the geothermal taps. In the lower reaches, the homes are nothing more than hollowed out cavities in the slag heaps, where the inhabitants must sleep in shifts to avoid being cooked by the rising thermal vents. There, the home is a shifting, fluid concept, a desperate claim staked in the darkness. Up here, we at least have the illusion of permanence. My neighbor, an old man who once served in the PDF and now spends his days wheezing into a respirator, tells me that in the spire tops, the nobles live in rooms so large that a man could walk for a minute and not hit a wall. We don't believe him, of course. To imagine a room with empty space is to imagine a world without gravity. It is a physical impossibility in the Hive. Space is the enemy. It is a vacuum that must be filled with bodies, machinery, or prayers. Every hab block is overseen by a local factorum overseer, a man whose word is the only law that matters between the hours of sunset and sunrise. He lives in a reinforced bunker at the end of the hall, his door guarded by 2 servitors whose flesh has long since been replaced by steel and hydraulic fluid. We pay our protection tithe to him in the form of extra labor or salvaged parts, and in return, he ensures that the oxygen levels in our corridor don't drop below the survival threshold. It is a brutal, efficient social contract. The home is not a place of safety, but a place of negotiated survival. When the overseer's bell rings, we must all present ourselves for inspection, showing our identification tabs and our work stamped palms. To be absent from your home during an inspection is to be declared a deserter, and the punishment for desertion is the loss of your hab rights, which is a slow death sentence in the smog-choked streets of the mid-Hive. The soundscape of the average home is a symphony of industrial misery. There is the scream, which is the sound of the atmospheric scrubbers straining to filter the toxins of the lower levels. There is the clatter, the sound of the heavy lev trains passing through the transit arteries 3 floors up. And there is the whisper, the most terrifying sound of all, the sound of the Hive rats scuttling through the walls, their claws scratching against the lead lining of the pipes. These rats are as large as small dogs, bloated on the waste of the city, and they are the only creatures that truly thrive in the hab blocks. I keep a heavy iron pipe under my bunk, not for the gangers, but for the rats. They are the true masters of the crawl spaces, the reminders that no matter how much we build, the rot is always waiting to reclaim our tiny iron islands. Family life in the Hive is a series of quiet tragedies. We do not have the luxury of privacy for our grief or our celebrations. When Elara lost our first child to the grey lung, the entire corridor knew. They heard her weeping through the vents, and they responded not with words, but with a rhythmic tapping on the walls, a signal of shared mourning that echoed through the block for 3 days. There was no funeral, for the body belonged to the reclamation vats, but we placed a small, hand-carved wooden cog on the shrine in our cell as a memorial. It is still there, tucked behind the icon of the Saint of Lost Causes. This is how we remember, not with monuments of stone, but with tiny objects hidden in the shadows of our homes. Our history is written in the scratches on the furniture and the stains on the floorboards, a secret language that only the desperate can read. The furniture we use is as recycled as the food. My chair is a repurposed ammunition crate from a long-forgotten war, its sides still bearing the faded markings of Acadian munitions factory. The bed frame is made of salvaged structural struts, welded together with such irregularity that it groans every time I turn over. We do not have cupboards or drawers, we have crates and hooks. Everything is designed to be packed away in a moment's notice, for the threat of reassignment is a constant shadow over our lives. If the manufacturer on level 402 needs more laborers, our entire block might be cleared out and moved to a different spire, leaving behind the only world we have ever known. We own nothing, not even the right to stay in one place. We are a nomadic people, moving from one iron cage to another at the whim of the administratum's logic engines. In the late hours of the night cycle, when the factory noise dims to a dull roar, the air in the hab unit becomes incredibly still. It is in this stillness that the weight of the hive truly settles on your chest. You realize that you are buried under billions of tons of metal and stone, that there are millions of people above you and millions more below, and that if the world were to end tomorrow, the galaxy would not even notice your absence. We cope with this insignificance through ritual. I spend the final hour of my day cleaning my work tools, laying them out on the table with the precision of a priest preparing for a mass. My wrenches, my soldering iron, my heavy-duty shears, they are the instruments of my utility, the only reason I am permitted to occupy this space. By caring for them, I am caring for myself. The light strips in our corridor are failing, flickering with a rhythmic spasm that gives the entire world a jittery, cinematic quality. It makes the shadows move in ways they shouldn't, turning the piles of trash and the leaning pipes into monsters of the deep hive. We tell our children that the Emperor's light protects them, but in the hab blocks, his light is dim and filtered through layers of industrial filth. We teach them to be afraid of the dark, for the dark is where the cults hide, where the desperate find solace in the whispers of things that should not be. Our homes are the only bastions of light we have, however flickering and pale that light may be. We keep our candles trimmed and our shrines polished, because if the light goes out in our cells, we fear it might go out in our souls as well. Sanitation is a luxury we barely understand. The communal wash stations are located at the end of each sub-corridor, where a single trickle of recycled water serves 50 families. We line up with our buckets and our grey, heavy soap, shivering in the draft that blows through the open grating of the floor. There is no warmth here, only the cold reality of hygiene. To be clean is to be compliant. The filthy are the first to be suspected of heresy or plague. We scrub our skin until it is raw, trying to wash away the smell of the machine shop, though we know it has already seeped into our pores. The water smells of sulfur and old bone, but we drink it and bathe in it and use it to boil our starch, for it is the only life blood the hive provides. Despite the crushing poverty, the home remains the center of our spiritual life. Every week, a traveling scribe comes through the corridor, offering to write prayers or petitions to the local saints in exchange for a portion of our rations. We pay him to write our names on slips of parchment, which we then glue to the door frame. We believe that if enough names are gathered, the Emperor will eventually notice us, that he will look down through the miles of steel and see that on Gamma 9, mid, we are still holding the line. It is a fragile hope, built on paper and spit, but it is the only thing that keeps the walls from closing in. We live in a world of iron, but our homes are built of faith and exhaustion. When the shift bell finally rings to end the day, and I return to my cell, I don't look at the walls. I don't look at the rusted pipes or the weeping condensation. I look at Elara, and I look at the small brass skull on the wall, and I remember that for one more day, we have survived. We have a roof over our heads, even if that roof is the floor of someone else's misery. We have a meal in our bellies, even if that meal is the remains of those who came before us. This is the average home in the 41st millennium, a place of narrow margins and hard truths, where the greatest luxury of all is the ability to close your eyes and wake up in the same place you fell asleep. It is not much, but in a galaxy of eternal war, it is everything. The air in the unit is growing thinner as the primary scrubbers enter their maintenance cycle. I can feel the pressure in my temples a familiar ache that signals the approach of the sleep cycle. We will lay down on our hard bunks, the metal cold against our backs, and we will listen to the heartbeat of the hive. It is a slow, rhythmic thud, the sound of a billion lives being ground down by the gears of history. We are part of that sound. We are the friction that creates the heat. And as the lumens finally flicker out, leaving us in the velvet dark of the hab block, we offer one last prayer to the throne, thankful for the cage that keeps us safe from the even greater terrors of the void. The heating in the hab block is never a matter of comfort, but of mechanical byproduct. We live in the heat, bleed of the great forges, a stifling, humid warmth that carries the scent of molten ore and scorched rubber. When the manufactorums are running at full capacity, the walls of our cells become hot to the touch, and we are forced to strip to our under tunics, sweating as we sit in the half-light of our domestic cages. It is a dry, suffocating heat that parches the throat and makes every breath feel like a chore. Conversely, during the rare periods of engine silence or gear shifting in the lower levels, the temperature plummets, and the dampness of the hive turns to a biting, industrial frost. We have no thermostats, no control over our environment. We simply endure the fluctuations of the machine's metabolism. To be home is to be a passenger in the guts of a leviathan, feeling its fever and its chills as it labors to produce the weapons of the Great Crusade. I have spent many hours staring at the ceiling of my unit, tracing the patterns of the rust, blooms that spread across the iron plating. They look like maps of forgotten continents or the profiles of skeletal kings. There is a specific kind of madness that comes from living in a room with no corners that are truly square, where every line is warped by the weight of the levels above. You begin to see things in the stains, faces of the martyrs, the outlines of Gino's monsters, the judgmental eyes of the Inquisition. We do not speak of these visions, for to acknowledge them is to admit that the hive is breaking your mind. We focus instead on the tangible, the weight of the ration, tin in the hand, the texture of the coarse blankets, the steady drip of the moisture, reclamation pipe. These are the anchors that hold us to reality when the scale of our world threatens to overwhelm us. The communal nature of our existence means that every sound is a shared burden. The pipes carry voices as much as they carry fluid. I know the cough of the widow 3 doors down, a wet, rattling sound that speaks of advanced hive rot. I know the rhythmic thud of the tailor on the level below, who uses a heavy stone to flatten the seams of the rough, spun tunics he produces for the PDF. Our homes are interconnected by a nervous system of copper and steel, a network of proximity that makes secrets impossible. If a man strikes his wife, the corridor knows it. If a child cries out in the night from a nightmare of the warp, the block knows it. This lack of privacy is not viewed as an intrusion, but as a form of collective security. In a world where the dark is filled with monsters, knowing your neighbor is still alive and suffering alongside you is a strange kind of comfort. Our furniture is a patchwork of necessity. My bed is a pallet of compressed recycled fibers held within a frame of salvaged rebar. It is as hard as the floor, but it keeps us off the cold metal. We have one chair, a bulky thing carved from a discarded shipping crate, its surface still bearing the stencil marks of an off-world trade house. We take turns sitting in it, for it is the only place in the cell where one can sit with a straight back. The rest of our lives are spent hunched over the table, hunched over the workbench, hunched in prayer. The hive does not want us to stand tall, it wants us compact, efficient, and out of the way. Even our shadows are short, cut off by the low ceilings and the crowded corridors. Water is the most frequent cause of conflict in the hab blocks. The distribution valves are controlled by the administratum, and the flow is often restricted to 2 hours during the morning cycle. When the pipes begin to groan, the entire corridor erupts into a frenzy of activity. We rush to the communal basins with every container we own, dented buckets, empty ration tins, even boots if the need is dire. The water is often discolored, a rusty orange or a cloudy grey, and it must be boiled over a portable chemical burner before it is safe to touch. To have a full bucket of water in your cell is to be wealthy for an hour. We guard it with the same intensity that a soldier guards his last magazine of ammunition. Every drop is measured, the first rinse for the face, the second for the tools, and the remaining dregs to dampen the air, filters. The religious life of the home is a constant, quiet hum. We do not have grand cathedrals in the Hive residential blocks, but we have the Way of the Saints, a series of small, recessed shrines built into the corners of the corridors. In our own cell, the shrine is the only thing we keep meticulously clean. It is a small wooden shelf holding a lead figurine of a nameless martyr and a handful of spent shell casings, offerings to the Emperor's martial spirit. We light a pinch of low-grade incense every Sunday, the blue smoke curling up to join the smog of the ceiling. It is in these moments of domestic worship that the home feels most like a sanctuary. For 5 minutes, we are not laborers, we are the faithful. The roar of the city fades, the heat of the walls is forgotten, and we are alone with the God of mankind. I remember a time when the power grid for our sector failed entirely for 3 days. It was the long dark, a period that still haunts the stories of the elders. Without the lumens, the hive became a place of absolute, predatory blackness. We huddled in our cells, the doors barred from the inside, listening to the screams echoing up from the sump levels. The air grew thick and foul as the scrubbers died, and the cold seeped in through the iron floorboards like a rising tide. We stayed alive by the glow of our votive candles, the tiny flames reflecting in our eyes as we whispered the litanies of protection. In the dark, the home was no longer a cage, it was a life raft. When the power finally surged back, the sudden glare of the lumens was so bright it blinded us for hours. We emerged from our cells blinking and weeping, thankful for the return of our illuminated prison. The clothing we wear in the home is the same clothing we wear to the factorum. We do not have loungewear or finery. Our coveralls are our second skin, stained with the oils of our trade and the dust of our travels. We wash them in the grey water, hanging them to dry over the ventilation grills, where the warm exhaust of the lower levels can reach them. The smell of drying wool and industrial grease is the smell of a peaceful evening. When we take our boots off, our feet are pale and swollen, mapped with the calluses of 1,000 miles walked on metal plating. We rub them with a foul, smelling tallow made from rendered grox fat, a small ritual of self-care that marks the boundary between the work shift and the rest period. Communication with the outside world is almost non-existent. We have no Vox receivers in our homes, no screens to show us the glory of the Imperium's wars. Our news comes from the public criers who stand on the platforms of the Lev stations, their voices amplified by distorted megaphones. They tell us of quotas met, of heretics purged, and of the eternal health of the Emperor. We bring these snippets of information back to our cells, turning them over in our minds like precious stones. The war in the Gothic sector is won, someone will say, and for a night, the air in the Hab block feels lighter. We take a desperate pride in victories we will never see, in worlds we will never walk upon. It makes our tiny rooms feel like part of something vast and invincible. The transition from childhood to labor happens quickly in the hive. Children do not have playrooms, they have the scrap heaps, the areas where the Hab block's waste is sorted before being sent to the incinerators. They learn to identify valuable alloys before they learn to read the high Gothic of the prayer books. My own son spent his days chasing the small, mechanical spiders that inhabit the cable ducts, his face permanently smeared with graphite and soot. His home was the crawl space behind the water heater, a place where he could hide from the noise of the adults. We watched him grow not in inches, but in the hardening of his expression, the way his eyes began to reflect the grey light of the lumens. When he was assigned to his first apprenticeship in the smelting pits, we gave him his grandfather's heavy leather gloves. That was his graduation. There was no party, only a final meal together before he moved to the apprentice, dormitories on level 112. Storage in a hab cell is a matter of vertical engineering. We have hooks for our tools, nets for our laundry, and narrow shelves for our rations. Everything is suspended, hanging from the ceiling or the walls like the cocoons of insects. If a single item is out of place, the room becomes impassable. This discipline of order is drilled into us from birth. A messy cell is a sign of a messy mind, and a messy mind is a breeding ground for deviancy. The enforcers check for this during their sweeps. They look for signs of hoarding, for unauthorized tech, for anything that suggests the occupant is trying to create a world of their own within the Emperor's domain. We keep our cells Spartan and functional, a reflection of the purity we are expected to maintain in our souls. The windows of our block are not made for looking out, but for letting in the false dawn, the moment when the massive external spotlights of the hive spire are ignited to simulate a day cycle. The light is a harsh, ultraviolet blue that makes the skin look bruised and the eyes ache. It spills through the grimy slits in the wall, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. We call it the Eye of the Emperor, a reminder that there is nowhere to hide from his scrutiny. When the false dawn arrives, we know we have 1 hour before the wake-up klaxon. It is the most peaceful hour of the cycle, a time of quiet reflection before the machinery of the day begins to grind us down once more. Death in the hab block is handled with the same efficiency as any other waste management process. When my father passed, the quiet men of the mortive factorum arrived with a black stretcher and a heavy plastic shroud. They didn't speak to us. They simply checked his identification tags, scanned his retinas to confirm the expiration of his labor contract, and carried him away. His bunk was sprayed with disinfectant, and by the time I returned from my shift that evening, a new laborer, a young man from the lower levels, was already sitting at our table, eating his starch in silence. We do not mourn with gravestones, we mourn with memory. I kept my father's small, rusted wrench, hiding it in the lining of my mattress. It is a piece of him, a piece of his labor, a piece of the life he gave to the hive. The security of our home is an illusion we choose to believe. The iron doors can be overridden by the central hub at any moment. The air we breathe can be laced with sedatives if the block becomes too rowdy. We are not residents, we are assets under storage. Yet, within this control, we find ways to be human. We share a joke about the overseer's stutter. We trade a piece of flavored starch for a handful of real salt. We hold each other in the dark, our hearts beating against the cold metal of the bunks. These are the small, defiant acts that define the average home. It is a place where the soul refuses to be as recycled as the body, where the spark of humanity flickers in the drafty corridors of an empire that has forgotten the individual. As I sit here now, writing these words on the back of a discarded manual, I can hear the evening bells of the local chapel. They are heavy, brassy notes that vibrate through the pipes, a sound that has remained unchanged for 1,000 years. It is the sound of the hive's soul, a tolling of duty and endurance. I will put away my pen, I will blow out the candle, and I will lie down in the dark. Tomorrow, the klaxon will sound. Tomorrow, the starch will be served. Tomorrow, the machine will demand its due. But tonight, for these few hours of darkness, this 3-meter cage is mine. It is my home, and in the 41st millennium, that is enough. The ventilation grills in the ceiling have a voice of their own, a constant, low, pitched whistle that changes tone depending on the atmospheric pressure in the primary transit shafts. We call it the hymn of the unseen, a reminder that our very survival is dictated by the unseen machineries of the Adeptus Mechanicus. In the average home, silence is the greatest indicator of disaster. If the whistle stops, it means the scrubbers have failed, and the carbon dioxide will begin to pool on the floor like an invisible flood. We live with our ears cocked toward the ceiling, even in sleep, our subconscious minds monitoring the health of the building as if it were a member of the family. This is the domestic reality of the hive, a constant, low-level anxiety that the environment itself might suddenly become hostile. We do not trust the walls to hold or the air to remain breathable. We are tenants of a precarious ecosystem, guests in a stomach of iron that is always digesting. Maintenance of the HAB unit is a personal responsibility, though we are rarely given the proper tools to perform it. When a pipe leaks, we do not call a plumber. We use rags soaked in industrial resin to bind the wound, whispering the litanies of adhesion as we work. The metal of our homes is old, suffering from 1,000 years of fatigue and the corrosive breath of 1 billion citizens. It pits and flakes, shedding scales of red rust that we must sweep into the corners to keep from inhaling. My table is a masterwork of such improvised repairs, its legs reinforced with the discarded casings of heavy bolter rounds I found in a scrap heap near the military levels. Each weld is a story of a struggle to keep the domestic space from collapsing back into the chaos of the hive. We are all amateur tech priests in our own right, coaxing a few more years of service out of machines that should have been decommissioned during the age of apostasy. The lighting in the residential block follows the logic of the tithe. When the manufacturum quotas are met, the lumens are bright and steady. When production lags, the power is throttled, and our homes descend into a murky, sepia-toned gloom. This creates a psychological link between our labor and our light. If we do not work, we do not see. We have learned to perform all our domestic chores in the half-light sewing, cleaning, eating by the tactile memory of where the objects sit. This sensory deprivation sharpens the other senses. You learn the texture of the wall by touch, the scent of a neighbor's arrival by the change in the draft, the weight of a ration can by the sound it makes against the table. We move through our homes like blind cave dwellers, our world defined by the reach of our arms and the limits of the shadows. Children in the hive do not have toys, not in the sense that the ancient records might describe. They have components. My son's favorite possession was a non-functional logic cog from a discarded data slate. He would sit on the bunk for hours, turning it over in his small, soot-stained hands, imagining it was a starship or a holy relic. We encourage this, for imagination is the only escape from the four walls of the cell. But we also teach them the danger of curiosity. To take apart a machine is a sacrilege. To question why the light strips flicker is a sign of a wandering mind. We raise them to be pieces of the machine, as rigid and reliable as the iron struts that support the floor. Their play is a rehearsal for their labor. Their game's a simulation of the grinding duty that awaits them the moment they reach the age of conscription. The smell of the home is a composite of every meal cooked and every person who has died within its confines. It is a thick, heavy aroma of old grease and ozone, with an underlying sweetness that comes from the rotting insulation in the walls. We burn small scraps of scent, parchment, blessed by the ecclesiarchy to mask it, releasing a sharp, a catalenic fragrance that stings the nostrils but suggests the presence of the divine. To an outsider, the smell of a hab block would be nauseating, a physical blow to the senses. To us, it is the smell of safety. It means the filters are working, the food is being processed, and the hive is alive. When I return from a long shift in the chemical extraction pits, the smell of my hab cell is the first thing that tells my body it can finally rest. It is the scent of the cage, and it is the only one we know. The storage of our few possessions is an exercise in extreme economy. We do not have closets. We have the deep space, the narrow gap between the ceiling plating and the ventilation ducts where we stash anything we wish to keep hidden from the periodic inspections. Here, we keep our family records, handwritten scrolls of births and deaths, and perhaps a forbidden item, like a fragment of real wood or a piece of colored glass from a broken spire window. These objects are our treasures, the small pieces of evidence that we are more than just numbers in a ledger. During an inspection, the enforcers will use long magnetic prods to search these gaps, and many a neighbor has been led away in chains because they dared to keep a souvenir of a world that no longer exists. We live with the fear that our memories are a form of contraband. Domestic hygiene is a grim affair. Because water is metered, we use sponges to clean our bodies, grey, abrasive pads soaked in a stinging alcohol, derivative that strips the oil from the skin. It leaves us smelling like a medica, ward our flesh pale and dry, prone to cracking in the humid heat of the hive. We do not bathe for pleasure. We scrub for survival. The Great Scoring is a ritual we perform once a month, where we use caustic lye to scrub the floors and walls of the cell, trying to kill the black mold that grows in the damp corners. This mold is a parasite of the hive, a living rot that feeds on the recycled air and the waste of the inhabitants. If left unchecked, it can colonize a man's lungs in weeks. The home is a battlefield where we fight a constant war against the biology of decay. The social life of the Hab block is centered around the transit hubs, the wide areas where the corridors meet and the elevators once stood. Here, on our rest cycles, we gather to exchange rumors. We talk about the price of black market stims, the latest edicts from the governor's palace, and the whispered tales of the Star Children, or other heretical cults that the Inquisition is hunting. These gatherings are dangerous. There are always informers among us, men and women who trade the names of their neighbors for an extra ration of starch or a better Hab assignment. We speak in code, using the slang of the factorums to hide our true meanings. The forge is running hot, might mean an enforcer raid is imminent. The air is thin, might mean someone has been taken for questioning. The home is the only place we can speak freely, and even then, we do it in whispers, our eyes fixed on the Vox grill in the wall. The aesthetics of the average home are entirely functional. Yet we find ways to impose our own sense of beauty. We use the oily soot from the vents to paint murals on the walls, crude depictions of the emperor on his throne, or the symbols of our guilds. These soot paintings are temporary, easily wiped away if an inspector complains, but they give the room a soul. My wife once painted a forest on the back of our door, using different shades of rust and grime to create the illusion of trees. I had never seen a tree, but looking at that mural made the air in the cell feel cooler, as if a ghost of a dead world had come to visit us. This is how we decorate. We use the waste of the machine to dream of things the machine has destroyed. Security is provided by the Iron Watch, a group of elder workers who have outlived their usefulness to the factories and now serve as the eyes and ears of the block. They sit in the shadows of the corridor, their faces mapped with scars and age, watching everyone who enters or leaves. They are not enforcers, but they are just as feared. They know who is hoarding water, who is skipping prayers, and who is talking to the strangers from the under-hive. To be in their good graces is to have a peaceful home. To offend them is to find your ration token misplaced, or your door jammed from the outside. The micro-politics of the Hab block are as complex and ruthless as the high courts of terror, played out over scraps of bread and minutes of oxygen. The transition between the life cycle and the work cycle is marked by the sounding of the great bell of the sector. It is a sound that vibrates the very liquid in your eyes, a deep, resonant boom that carries the weight of 10,000 years of tradition. When the bell tolls, the home is emptied. The corridors fill with a silent, shuffling mass of humanity, all moving toward the factorum gates in a synchronized tide of duty. We leave our cells unlocked, for we have nothing worth stealing, and the enforcers must be able to enter at any time for sanctity checks. To lock your door is to admit you have something to hide. We step out into the smog, our hearts hardening for the shift ahead, leaving our tiny iron sanctuaries to wait for our return. If the Emperor wills it, I remember my grandfather's home, a cell even smaller than mine on a level so deep that the walls were always vibrating with the roar of the main heat exchangers. He had a window, a small porthole of thick, yellowed glass that looked out into a vertical ventilation shaft. He used to sit by it and watch the dust motes dancing in the light of the distant fusion lamps. He told me that each mote of dust was a soul, drifting through the machine until it was eventually sucked into the great filters. He died by that window, his eyes fixed on the dancing dust. When they took his body away, I looked through the glass and saw only the dark and the endless, spinning fans. That is the legacy of the Hive. We are born in the dark, we work in the noise, and we die watching the dust of our own lives vanish into the machinery. The kitchen, if it can be called that, consists of a single induction plate and a recycled cooling loop for the water. We do not cook, we rehydrate. The process of preparing a meal is a ritual of patience, waiting for the gray starch cubes to absorb enough water to become edible. We eat from the same bowls our parents used, the metal worn smooth by decades of contact with spoons. There is no joy in eating, only the grim satisfaction of a biological necessity met. We sit in the yellow light, the steam from the starch rising to join the dampness on the ceiling, and we realize that this meal is exactly the same as the one being eaten by millions of others across the hive. We are a single organism, fed by a single pipe, living in a single, infinite room. In the rare hours of leisure, we do not rest. We repair. We mend our clothes with wire and scrap cloth. We sharpen our tools on the stones of the corridor floor. We memorize the litanies of the saints. To be idle is to be dangerous. The home must be a place of constant, quiet industry. My wife spends her evenings weaving mats from the discarded plastic stripping of the packing crates, which we use to cover the cold floorboards. It is a way to pass the time, to keep the mind from dwelling on the scale of the world outside. We work because we are afraid of what happens when we stop. We work because the machine never stops, and we are its children. The evening light is fading now, the primary lumen switching to the dim red of the rest phase. The cell is bathed in the color of old blood, the shadows stretching out like reaching hands. I can hear the neighbors returning, the sound of heavy boots and tired voices filling the corridor. Soon, the iron gates will be locked, and we will be alone in our cages once more. I will lie down on the bunk and close my eyes, trying to imagine the trees Elara painted on the door. I will listen to the whistle of the ventilation and the scratching of the rats, and I will wait for the great bell to call me back to the forge. This is the average home. This is the heart of the Imperium. It is a place of iron, of rust, and of an endurance that defies the very stars. The final boundary of the home is not the iron door, but the reclamation threshold where the citizen and the state become one. We live with the constant knowledge that our bodies, much like our Hab cells, are temporary vessels owned by the Golden Throne. In the twilight of a long life spent in the Gamma sectors, the home begins to feel less like a shelter and more like a waiting room for the inevitable transition to the nutrient vats. The air in these final years grows heavier, flavored with the chemical sharpness of the medica, stims required to keep an aging frame at its station. We do not retire, we simply shift our utility. When the hands can no longer turn the heavy wrenches of the smelting pits, they are moved to the sorting tables of the waste, reclamation blocks, where the home becomes a place to nurse the wounds of a lifetime of labor. Here, in the quietude of the waning cycles, the sensory details of the Hab unit take on a sacred quality. The way the rust flakes fall like snow from the ceiling during a heavy transit quake, or the rhythmic hiss of the steam valves that sounds like the breathing of a titan. These are the final lullabies of the hive dweller. I have seen the end of many lineages in this corridor. When the last member of a family expires, the home is subjected to the sanctity of purpose protocol. A team of white-clad servitors enters the cell, their movements mechanical and devoid of empathy. They do not see the suit, painted murals, or the hidden copper scraps under the bunks. They see only the mass of the biological matter to be recovered and the cubic meters of space to be cleared. Within an hour, the history of a century is compressed into a single waste canister. This is the ultimate truth of the average home. It is a rented space in a galaxy that has no room for sentiment. We are ghosts haunting a machine that is already moving on to the next generation of components. The icons we polished, the prayers we whispered, the very air we breathed, it is all recycled, filtered, and served back to the newcomers who will sit at our tables and sleep in our bunks without ever knowing our names. To understand the scale of this existence, one must look at the void stairs, the massive, open, grated stairwells that plunge through the center of the residential spire. From the landing outside my door, I can look down into a deep chasm of flickering lights and rising smog. Each light represents a cell, a family, a struggle for survival identical to my own. It is a hive in the truest sense, a mountain of iron vibrating with the collective effort of millions. The home is merely a single cell in this gargantuan organism. We are the blood cells of the Imperium, moving through the narrow veins of the corridors to deliver our energy to the heart of the war machine. When we return to our cells at night, we are not going home to rest. We are going home to recharge, to mend our flesh so that we may be consumed again on the morrow. There is a strange, terrible beauty in this absolute uniformity. Across a million worlds, in a billion hive cities, the scene I am describing is being repeated. There is a man sitting at a metal table, staring at a block of starch. There is a woman mending a garment by the light of a dying candle. There is a child dreaming of a sky he will never see. This is the shared domesticity of mankind, the bedrock of the Emperor's dominion. It is not built on the grand palaces of the High Lords or the shining armor of the Astartes, but on the endurance of the humble citizen in his 3-meter iron cage. Our homes are the fortresses that the enemies of man can never truly conquer, for there are too many of us, too many cells, too many souls packed into the dark for any fire to ever truly extinguish. We are the eternal tenants of the grim darkness, and our rent is paid in the currency of suffering and faith. As the primary lumens begin their final fade into the red phase, signaling the end of my recording, the hive seems to pull closer. The walls feel warmer, the hum of the machinery deeper. I look at the small brass skull above my door, its surface gleaming in the dying light. It is a symbol of death, yes, but also a symbol of permanence. It will be here long after I am gone, watching over the next worker and the worker after that. I lie down on the bunk, the cold metal a familiar weight against my spine. I close my eyes and listen to the breathing of the city, the hiss of steam, the clatter of trains, the distant, muffled coughs of 1,000 neighbors. This is my world. This is my cage. This is my home. And I would have it no other way, for in the shadow of the throne, even the smallest cell is a part of the light.